Welcome back to Major Intonio's presentation of Napoleon's Marshals by R.P. Dunn-Pattison. Chapter 13, Bon Adrien Jeannot de Moncey, Marshal, Duke of Conegliano.
The glamour of war appeals strongly to most men. To some it calls with irresistible demand. Such an one was the Duke of Conegliano. Born on July 31, 1754, at Palisse, a little village of Besançon, the son of a well-to-do lawyer, Bon Adrien Jeannot loathed scholarship and loved adventure. When but 15 years old, the future marshal ran away from school and enlisted in the Conti Regiment of Infantry. After 6 months' service, he reluctantly agreed to the purchase of his discharge by his father, but very soon ran away again to enlist in the regiment of Champagne. He served with this regiment till 1773, when, finding that his hopes of gaining a commission were disappointed, he once again bought himself out. A few months, however, spent in the study of the law only served to increase his hatred of a sedentary life and to kindle once more his old ambition. And he again enlisted as a private, this time in the gendarmerie. But now fortune was more kind, and after 4 years' service he achieved his desire and was gazetted in 1779 as sub-lieutenant in the dragoons of Nassau-Siegen. It was not, however, till April 1791 that he gained his captaincy, which had cost him 23 years' hard service. But now promotion came rapidly, and in 3 years' time he rose to the rank of general of division. In 1793, Moncey's regiment of dragoons formed part of the Army of the Western Pyrenees. In the first engagement with the enemy, he had the good fortune to distinguish himself. The Spanish commander-in-chief, Bonaventura Casa, led a charge of horse against the ill-disciplined recruits and volunteers who formed the mass of the French army covering Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port. The miserable French infantry broke, with cries of, "We are betrayed!" and it was Moncey who, rallying a few brave men, stopped the charge of the enemy's horse. Energetic, clear-witted, and self-confident, he soon became a man of mark. In February 1794, he was promoted general of brigade, and 6 months later general of division, in which capacity, in August of that year, he was mainly instrumental in forcing the lines of Fontarabia. On the proposition of Barrère, he was, a few days later, appointed by the Convention Commander-in-Chief of the Army of the Western Pyrenees. In October, he fully justified his selection by forcing the famous pass of Roncesvalles, so intimately connected with the names of Charlemagne and the Black Prince. This action, which made good a footing in Spain, was extremely brilliant. The position, strong by nature, had been made almost impregnable by months of hard labor. Moreover, the French troops were badly handicapped by the difficulty of getting food, but by now they were very different from the ill-trained levies of 1793. The turning column, which had 4 days' hard mountain climbing and fighting on 3 biscuits per man, found nothing to eat when the pass was forced, save a little flour, for the Spanish had burnt their magazines. In spite of this, there was no grumbling, and the men, as their general reported, pressed on with cries of "Vive la République." Moncey, like Napoleon, knew how to use the great driving force of hunger. He thoroughly deserved the thanks which he received from the Convention, and he fully earned them again when, early in 1795, he drove the Spanish army in flight across the Ebro, for it was his magnificent forward movement which forced Spain to accede to the Treaty of Basel. From Spain, the general was transferred to the Army of the Côte de Brest. A year later, he was posted to the command of the 11th Military Division at Bayonne, and he was still there when, in October 1799, Bonaparte returned from Egypt and overthrew the Directory. No politician, it mattered little to Moncey, who governed France, as long as the honor of the country was maintained and he saw active service. Accordingly, he gladly accepted from the new government the position of lieutenant to Moreau, the commander-in-chief of the Army of the Rhine. But he did not serve long under his new chief, being detached in May at the head of 16,000 to cross the Alps by the St. Gothard Pass, as part of the great stroke aimed at the Austrian lines of communication in Italy. His corps formed a flank guard to the main army of the reserve, which crossed the St. Bernard under Napoleon himself. In the operations which succeeded the Battle of Marengo, the first consul made full use of Moncey's great experience in mountain warfare, and sent him to the Valtelline to join hands with MacDonald, who was crossing the Alps by the Splugen Pass. Thereafter, his division formed the left wing of the French army under Brune. After a brilliant series of skirmishes in the mountains, Moncey drove the flying enemy into Trent, but he was robbed of complete victory by the Austrian general, Laudon, who sent a message to say that Brune and Bellegarde had made an armistice. Unfortunately for the French, their general, the soul of honor, suspected no deceit, and thus the Austrians were saved from annihilation or absolute surrender. After the Peace of Luneville, General Moncey was appointed Inspector General of Gendarmerie, and on Napoleon's elevation to the throne was created, in 1804, Marshal, Grand Officer of the Legion of Honor, and in 1808, Duke of Conegliano. Moncey invariably spoke his mind, and for this reason was no favorite with the emperor. Further, in comparison with his fellow marshals, he was an old man, so from 1800 to 1808, he was not employed on active service. But on the invasion of Spain, Napoleon determined to make use of the Duke of Conegliano's knowledge of that country and ordered him to proceed there with the Army of Observation of the Ocean, which he was then commanding at Boulogne. This army became the Third Corps of the newly formed Army of Spain. It was composed almost entirely of recruits, and when Murat marched into Madrid at the head of the Third Corps, the poor physique of these weak and weedy privates had a very bad effect on the situation, for the Spaniards thought they could easily defeat such troops. From Madrid, the marshal was sent to capture Valencia, which had broken out into revolt against the French. Though old, the Duke of Conegliano was still active and vigorous. After a month's continuous fighting across mountain passes and rivers, he reached Valencia, but he found the town in a state of defense. As Napoleon said on hearing of his check, a city of 80,000 inhabitants, barricaded streets, and artillery entrenched at the gates cannot be taken by the collar. Accordingly, there was nothing for it but to retreat, and this the marshal did in such a masterly manner that the failure of his expedition produced but little bad effect on the French cause. When, after Bailén, Joseph held his council of war at Madrid, Moncey alone stood out for the bold course of cutting communication with France and concentrating around the capital. But he was overruled, and the French fell back on the line of the Ebro. As soon as Napoleon arrived in Spain, he vented his anger indiscriminately on all those marshals who had served under Joseph, but his greatest displeasure fell on Moncey, for the Duke of Conegliano did not believe that Spain could be gained by hanging all those who resisted, and had actually received the thanks of the Junta of Oviedo, who considered him a just and honorable man, and published a manifesto saying, "We know this illustrious general detests the conduct of his companions." Accordingly, in the eyes of the emperor, he had been guilty of bungling and slackness, if not of something worse, and he was therefore subjected to the cruel affront of being placed under the orders of Lannes, a junior marshal. Though much annoyed, as a soldier he could only obey, and the emperor's decision was to some extent justified, as Lannes won the Battle of Tudela with the same troops which Moncey had not dared to lead against the enemy. 3 months later, the marshal was once again superseded by Lannes, and this time recalled and sent to France. The ostensible reason for this was that, in the emperor's opinion, he had not pressed the siege of Saragossa. With a desire to avoid bloodshed, he had tried to induce the Spaniards to capitulate by entering into negotiations, instead of pushing on his siege batteries. But his real offense was that he had not concealed his dislike of the seizure of Spain. In 1812, his disgrace was deepened, for he expressed with equal frankness his hatred of the Russian campaign. Though never again employed at the front, the emperor made use of him in 1809 in Holland, and in 1812 and 1813 he led the Army of Reserve. While in 1814 he was appointed Major General of the National Guard of Paris and made responsible for the defense of the capital. In the last dark days before the city capitulated, Moncey, with 6,000 citizen soldiers, fought bravely outside the Clichy Gate. On the Restoration, the Marshal became a Minister of State and a member of the new Chamber of Peers, and was confirmed in his old appointment of Inspector of Gendarmerie. But on the return of Napoleon, he forgot the wrongs the Emperor had done him. He thought only of the glory Napoleon had once won for France, so he swore allegiance to the imperial government and was created a peer. But on account of his age, the emperor gave him no military command. To punish him for his desertion, Louis XVIII, on the Second Restoration, appointed him president of the Council of War for the trial of Ney. But the Duke of Conegliano wrote to the king boldly refusing to have anything to do with the trial of the hero of Moscow. So angry was the king at his courageous act that he stripped the veteran of his marshalate and the title of duke, and sent him to prison for 3 months in the castle of Ham, the same prison which was later to receive the future Napoleon III. But time brought forgiveness. In 1819, the marshal was restored to his honors, and in 1823 was actually once again employed on active service. It must have brought strange memories of the past to the veteran, who had been thought too old to fight at Waterloo, again to see service in Spain, where he had won his laurels in 1794 and had found naught but disgrace in 1808. So, in his 70th year, he made his last campaign, not in command of a Republican or Imperial army, but as a corps commander in the Royal Army under the Duc d'Angoulême. This time, however, there was but little call on his courage and ability, for the campaign brought no fighting and was merely a military promenade. On the fall of the Bourbon dynasty, the marshal took no active part in affairs, but as governor of the Invalides in December 1833, he had the honor to receive the remains of Napoleon when they were translated to France, and on his death 9 years later in 1842, at his special request, he was buried in the Isle of the Brave, close to the tomb of the great emperor.
This concludes Chapter 13 of Napoleon's Marshals by R.P. Dunn-Pattison. Join us also for Chapter 14, about Jean-Baptiste Jourdan. Subscribe to Major Intonio's channel. We'll get back to you next week. Thank you very much, and so long.